Hey, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas. It's Saturday morning, my friend, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Yeah, good morning. This is Stan coming to you from Gainesville, Florida, and you are listening to Light Talk.
And this is David coming to you from the beautiful Belmont Shore neighborhood of Long Beach, California. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers. Welcome, everyone, to episode 320. And today we are happy to have lighting designer and lighting coordinator for the Canadian Opera Company, Mikael Kangus, on the show.
Woohoo!
Yeah, but before we get started, Stan, could you tell us a bit about Mikael?
I'm going to give it a shot, and hopefully I can pronounce everything correctly. So, Mikael designs for theater of all types. His recent work includes Damn Yankees, Trouble in Mind, Glass Menagerie, Oh Flattery, VC at the Shaw Festival, Phantasma at the Canadian Opera Company, Newsies, Crazy for You at the Sheridan Theatre, Julia, Dear Evan Hansen, a Canadian assistant designer, Macbeth, Tosca, Marriage of Figaro, Rusalka, Oyegin, Cosi fan tutte, Elixir of Love, Abduction from the Sigalio. Mikael is the lighting and projection design coordinator for the Canadian Opera Company in addition to his other work. Mikael is a member of the Associated Designers of Canada, and you can go to their website and check them out. So, Mikael, welcome to Light Talk, and we got some great questions, and I have heard nothing but amazing things about you, and I'm going to have some tough questions for you.
He's putting you on the spot, Mikael. Hey, how's it going in Toronto?
It's going well. Thank you for having me on the show today.
Oh, it's great, you know. By the way, to our listeners, Mikael and I have gotten to know each other pretty well over the last year or so. Working with lighting design assistant Sarah Manzika, Mikael and I just opened Tosca last week. And I think that's the last show of the season. Is that correct?
It's the last show of the season, of our 6-show season, yeah.
Wow. So, and how many shows was in the season? Was it like 6 or 8 or something?
So we do 6 in a year, two per sort of mini season in the fall, winter, and spring.
And this was the second show of the spring, right?
Yeah, second show of the spring, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right, because you did a sort of a new co-production of Macbeth in right before our show that opened, and then Tosca opened after that. And Tosca was a remount, it was a revival of a production that actually premiered there back, I believe, in 2008 or 12 or something like that. I keep forgetting the years. It was a great production, but we just did, and it was a really calm, low-stress production. Unless, Mikael, you have something else to say about that I didn't see. I don't know. But in a moment of weakness, I asked Mikael to be on the show because I was so impressed with his talents. Because what he does is really amazing. And I thought it'd be great to have him on the show to talk a little bit about the skills that young lighting designers need to get a great position like Mikael has. Because it's a steady job, right, Mikael?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the kind words, David. Yeah, it's great to have a steady gig.
How long have you been there?
I've been an assistant at the Canadian Opera Company since 2017, on and off. But
wow.
But this is my first year as actually the design coordinator.
You must like it there. You've got quite an investment.
Yes, it's a nice place to work for sure.
So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about what your roles are there as lighting coordinator for the Canadian Opera Company?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm the lighting coordinator. So we do 2 shows in rep, 2 big operas in rep every season, and we design a lighting plot from scratch based on those 2 shows every season to suit whatever those 2 shows might be. And a lot of, be they remounts or new to the company or completely new works. And so I have to figure out between the 2 shows what we need to put where, but there's only really one lighting plot for 2 shows. So we've got to figure out how that all works.
So when you're looking at shows and you're dealing with, like, there's, in this case, one of the shows was a remount and the other show was done previously at Lyric Opera, right, or Chicago. So you took the plot that they did there and then, or did the designer at that point send you a new plot using whatever, speccing out whatever lighting fixtures that he wanted, and then you looked at my plot from 5 years ago and he said, what works, what doesn't work, what can I join, what can work for both shows, what can work for only one show, what's separate. So is that part of the process as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And really on both shows. Macbeth is the other show that was in that rep, and it's new, yes, from the Chicago Lyric. And so I took that plot and came up with a proposal for that lighting designer that also worked for Tosca, particularly in terms of moving light placement and how we could share them and how we can share. In our theater, the electric pipes aren't prescribed pipes, aren't set pipes. So picking which pipes are the electric pipes and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, and then in tandem, sort of negotiated back and forth with both of you on what the final product would.
Yeah, well, I was pretty easy, though, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely.
I was a prima donna. Although this show was pretty straightforward. And I know that in this show, in Tosca, we used a lot of the existing incandescent fixture inventory. The other designer is David Finn, and did he use a lot of the incandescents as well?
A fair amount, but not. Yeah, so we have a saturation hang in our front of house, and there is your show used quite a bit of that, and we leave that there all the time. But Macbeth, there's not a lot of front light in that show, so right. Not as much usage out there. So in that sense, it was a little easier to coordinate that part of it than sometimes it is. Because sometimes we'll have to refocus lamps between operas that might actually be in both operas,
right.
Just because we run out of space in the front of house. But yeah, yes, definitely a lot of usage out front and a lot of moving lights this season, more than we often get in there.
Yeah, how many did you use?
I think our grand total is like 65 or 67 moving lights total, yeah, between the two shows.
Could you tell our listeners a little bit about organizing the turnarounds and how those turnarounds are scheduled? So a lot of people don't understand that one show opens and then the other show's basically going into techs, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So we opened Macbeth, and then the very next day at 8 in the morning, bright and early, we were there breaking the set down and moving it out of the way so that we could push the Tosca set into place. And at the Canadian Opera Company, and I think it's pretty standard for a lot of opera companies, there's 4 or 5 hours in which to take one set and get it off stage and put the other show on stage, and to set all the lighting around that, all the booms, ground-based lighting fixtures, set-based fixtures, refocus any of the front of house, check all the moving lights work. In the rep we have right now, we take a truss in and out of the air, because of some scenic stuff that flies in the one show, but we need lights in the other show. And so, we do that, and we only have 4 or 5 hours to do sort of a kind of a big load-in task between shows. It's right away. There's not a lot of pausing between one show opening and the next show. It's we open one show, you go into tech for the next show, you open that one, and then as soon as you're done that, you flip back to the other show and do a performance of that.
Why don't you tell us your process when remounting a show, like using different equipment for show use? Like, for instance, in our show, we used VL 3500s and VL 1000 arcs, and then we moved to Mac Encores. How do you deal with that? And what types of software do you use, especially when you're dealing with different color systems?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I guess the most straightforward kind of remount we do is something that's been in the venue before, as opposed to a remount of something that's been somewhere else, but at least done before. But when it's in the venue, at least I have a drawing and documentation of where it was before, so at least I know where all the units go. But it will have been 3, 4, 5, 10 years. One of the shows in the fall had been 12 years since we last mounted it. So even if we wanted to, the gear would have to change substantially production to production, particularly of things like moving lights, but even color scrollers or CXI scrollers. Or LED equipment from 5 or 6 years ago that has since fallen out of favor. And so I think I look at what first thing I always do is bring everything into a new plot, and then just start working on what suitable substitutions might be. Color scrollers for LED Lecos, VL 1000s go away for something like a Mac Encore, which we own a bunch of, and then it's about looking at the show, at photos of the show, at the data in the show file, at any other documentation I have, and to see like how okay, it was a VL1000, but it doesn't mean they were using all the features of that light. And what was that light actually doing in the show, and what do we use to replicate it?
I have a follow-up on that one, Michael, about the equipment. Like what caught my ear is when you said, I'll look at a VL1000 and maybe they didn't use all the features of that light, which maybe allows you to think of what you're going to replace it with. Do you use, I've always wondered what people use the tracking. When you look in EOS, it can track what's on and what's off across cues. And I always wondered, I wonder what people use that for. Right, how often that people use that feature, the way that data is presented. So let's say you're looking at a VL3000 and, how often did they use, I don't know, the rotating gobo? So how would you know that? Would you look through the show file in a particular way to filter for that? Or how would you get that data that you just talked about?
Yeah, for sure. I think the quickest and easiest way is to go into the spreadsheet view in EOS and to look through and to really just go systematically through it and say, like, okay, do these moving lights actually move, for instance? Do they actually they actually change color? Something like that.
Right. So the spreadsheet view, you use the spreadsheet view, which is sort of like, I always wondered, like, I've used it maybe like 6 times in my life, and I wondered how often that spreadsheet, but there's a real purpose for the spreadsheet view. And I think I have the next question, yeah? The question says, how do you transfer ARC with CMY filters to LED colors, and what tools do you use, and how important is it to make eye adjustments quickly and efficiently? And let me just embellish that a little bit. I'm curious that David told me how brilliant you are at doing that. And so I think I know the answer in that you rely upon your eye, but I wonder if are you working in EOS software, by the way, out of curiosity?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, in the color picker, there were like 8 or 9 different ways of representing color in the metrics. You have XY, you have HS, hue saturation and HSI, and you have, direct, and there's so many different ways of looking at, like, let's say the XY location of what the light, for example, when the arc was in or the color was mixed in the CMY, you could see what the XY and intensity values were. Do you ever use the math side of it, or do you just completely rely on your brilliant retinas?
Well, I mean, I think the answer is you've got to use your eyeballs. I think the data can, make sure that you start in a place that makes sense. Like, you can see in EOS that light was pink, and then when you transfer it from one type of light to the next in EOS, you can see, oh yeah, still kind of that pink in the color picker. And then when you put it on stage, you have to remember things like, okay, what was the source behind this color mixing system before? Was it tungsten? Was it arc? What is it now? So what's the baseline that's different? And then sort of dial it in by eye. What was the design intent in the moment with that color? Because obviously it's not just like random colors and random lights. It's whole composed cue. And what were you trying to do? And then figure out the best way to sort of get back to that using your eyes, really, as you said, and it's also about knowing the gear you're using, and the gear it's coming from is also super helpful. Like, if you know that particular kind of moving light tends to be quite green, which comes up a lot, so we'll take an old file that has little pink, a little bit of magenta correcting every cue a moving light's up in, because it was too green, acting as like a minus green filter. But then when it moves into a more modern white LED lamp, that having that magenta in there doesn't make any sense anymore. The native color is what was actually desired. So it's knowing things like that and sort of getting behind the idea of like what was being done in the original production that really can inform how to make changes like that.
All of those subtle points I think are really important. So if I'm hearing you right, so you might use, if you're setting the show or remounting the show, would you and if you're working in blind, would you start with the metric from let's say show A to show B, right? And then when you get to the theater, you're closer and the work is maybe, that's I guess, are you saying that you might use the math in the blind scenario, and then when you get to the stage, of course, you're going to adjust with the eye, or not, or do you ever have the opportunity to do it blind first?
Yeah, I mean, we have a little bit of opportunity to do it blind first, and and then it's just about looking at numbers on a screen, and they can,
Right.
but they can only tell you so much. But the console's really
course.
great at preserving a good amount, and it tends to lead you not too far wrong. But it's always helpful to have the original file at the desk and to be looking at that and going, okay, what was that and why was that?
On an average show, which probably doesn't exist, how much time do you typically budget yourself to remount a production?
So at the Canadian Opera Company, like you're talking about in terms of like queuing sessions, technical time in the theater?
I'm talking about you walk into someone's office and they say, we're doing these 2 remounts this year. Do you say, okay, it's going to take me 40 hours on each show from the minute I walk out of this office till opening night to have my portion of the work done so that the designer and the director are off in their world? How do you budget time?
I mean, I think that for the operas that are the size that go in here, it takes a good sort of solid 2 weeks, probably, if you sat down and did it exclusively for 2 weeks straight of prep work to get to a place where you're ready to go into the theater with it. And then there's usually about 12 hours of queuing, 8 hours of focus, maybe less, and then a couple of piano rehearsals, couple orchestra rehearsals, and it's open.
David kind of touched on this a second ago. Are there any magical software programs out there that you've discovered that really help you in the process?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is whenever you're remounting something, the biggest thing is how much the person before you did to document what it was.
Right.
Because
and thank God you had very good people before you.
Yes. So I was able to, with both the shows this season, I had a lot of photographs. I had some moving light assistant files. I had good drawings and Vectorworks, good light right documentation, and just a lot of good old fashioned sort of writing in Excel about stuff as well. And it's all just about what you got before, because so that's an important part of my job. I feel is to document what we do achieve, so that then when the opera is inevitably remounted, you've got hopefully a better record than you went into it with.
All right, so 10 years from now, when you've moved on to something bigger and better, is your replacement going to lift a beer to you and say, that Michael, man, he documented this show really well for me?
Well, probably not. Probably someone will be cursing me going, why you didn't take a photo of that? What's going on?
I don't agree. I don't agree.
But I think the thing I've learned most is like take photographs of everything, because writing stuff down, it can be tricky to sometimes to represent like a focus in words or in drawings. Pictures speak 1,000 words, and they also capture the things that you forget to explicitly write about too.
And speaking of photos, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about Moving Light Assistant and how it helps you recreate presets, moving light presets?
Yeah, Moving Light Assistant's a great piece of software out of the UK, and it is based. I mean, the way the features I use mostly in it are to photograph presets and individual channels in those presets, and to photograph cues as well. And the great thing about Moving Light Assistant is you can take an export of the EOS file. You import it into Moving Light Assistant. It knows what all the lights are doing in the show, and so it can interface then with the console, and you can take photos of lights in presets in a very organized way. And then when you're remounting a show, you have a file that you can browse through, and you can select moving light number 20, and you can look at photos of each preset that does, and then you can look at photos of those presets as a whole, and use those to refocus the lights when you're remounting the show.
Just so people know, You're talking about time to do this. In this particular instance, we didn't have. I know, Michael, you did some of these of the presets, but a lot of the presets of recreating you had to do over rehearsals. That means you have to work really fast and really accurately. But you had everything out on like 2 or 3 monitors, so you could see what the preset looked like, and you could basically work with the programmer over rehearsals while the time I'm working on things too. It was really kind of great. I mean, it was really wonderful how efficient that was. Was that something you just developed? I mean, just because you have to do it, or is it something you just like, because there's no time, right?
There is no time. Yeah. Stage time is expensive everywhere. And not a lot of people give a dedicated session to just focus moving lights. So yeah, we're jumping into a rehearsal. We need to focus moving lights on top of it and highlight lights and move them to where they need to go. And yeah, I mean, I guess it's just it's just developed a way of doing that over assisting and associating with people for a few years now, and you just sort of can discover that rhythm of when to pop in with the designer and when to not, and to work as quickly as you can with the programmer and sort of use all of that time up.
Yeah, and I think that's always been the case, because even when I learned how to do this in the early 80s, and we didn't have any moving lights, you just had to work over rehearsals. Yeah, I think students get the false idea that they'll have all this lighting time in a dark theater. Well, that doesn't happen too often anymore, and it certainly doesn't happen in opera.
Michael, could you talk a little bit more about the connectivity between Moving Light Assistant and the console? I think you hinted at it, but I want to understand that a little bit better, and for our listeners, like what data is connected in real time?
So you set it up by taking an export from EOS, so you can just run an export to Moving Light Assistant, and you import that file into Moving Light Assistant, and that lets it know what presets it's looking for in what lamps, what the various lamp types are, what the Q numbers are, all that kind of stuff. But then you can network Moving Light Assistant in with EOS using OSC. And using OSC commands from either the console or from Moving Light Assistant, you can trigger scripts in Moving Light Assistant to have the console bring all the lights up in each preset. So like bring up all the lights in preset 1, take a photo of that, and then just run through each individual channel of that preset, taking individual photos of that as it goes, and that. It's way more efficient than doing that by manually would ever be, and because it has the show file, like you don't miss anything.
So clearly, we were kind of devastated by COVID down here, and now we're having this kind of weird budget inflation economy thing. What's the state of the profession in Canada, particularly for young lighting designers trying to foothold there?
Sure. I mean, I think that a lot of what's true in the United States is probably true in Canada as well. We had that pause for the pandemic really impacted a lot of people, I think, at the beginning of their careers, and a lot of people graduating from school now who haven't had the chance to maybe in their school, their theater school, do much actual production work with the time off for COVID, and a lot of smaller theater companies where people really would cut their teeth have certainly, if not closed, scaled way back. So yeah, I think it's a tough time to get in right now for sure.
Certainly, there's Canadian Opera Company. There's a Shaw Festival. Where do young designers? Where are they trying to get to launch their careers? What opportunities are there?
There's not necessarily a lot of assisting opportunities in Canada. There's just with the scale of shows and the way the design fee economy has worked here, there's not a lot of shows outside of a few institutions that have assistants. So the Canadian Opera Company, the Shaw Festival, the Stratford Festival, all in Ontario, are basically the biggest year in, year out employers of assistant designers. There are some other opportunities out west, at the Banff Centre, at the Vancouver Opera, but the lion's share of assistant design positions of all kinds in the country are sort of based in Ontario around those three companies. There's only so many of those jobs.
You're a member of the Associated Designers Canada. What opportunities are you guys trying to build through your union?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, Associated Designers of Canada has existed for a while now, but over the pandemic, we were able to certify as an IATSE local, similar to USA 29 is. And we've used that to, we're in the midst of negotiating for the first time our agreement with the sort of Canada-wide Producers Association that we primarily deal with. And being IATSE local has really helped us do stuff like that. And we're really trying to set up mentorship programs within the local to really facilitate and create more positions for young designers to make a little bit of money and actually get to spend some time on a show, which is something that's definitely lacking.
I would think in Toronto, it's a very large city, and there's a lot of arts going on there, but it sounds like there are fewer opportunities. Are there any small companies in Toronto that young lighting designers could get their start working in, meeting directors?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly are. There's smaller companies. We've got a robust Fringe Festival and a couple of other sort of things like that as well. But there can be a really big gap between starting out and at places that don't have the money to pay,
right? And
then what fewer opportunities do happen, sort of more professionally or a higher end. It's fierce competition for sure, and there's not a long list of working full-time lighting designers in Canada. Really, it's pretty tough. And I think by contrast to the United States, in Canada, it's more typical to just sort of do an undergrad and not get a master's. I know it's more common in the United States to get a master's and then move on to something like design. But those programs there aren't really programs like that up here. So that kind of opportunity to meet people further along in their careers and maybe do that as part of a master's is something that is a little more, you got to find that yourself here.
So I would think the world you live in is pretty fast and furious. So sometimes I bet there are maybe some tension at the production table. How do you deal with that? How do you become Solomon?
I mean, it's interesting because working in the opera company, we've done 6 shows this year with 6 completely different people. Each designer I worked with this year, I'd never worked with before. And at the COC in particular, there are often designers coming in from out of the country. And so, yeah, every process really begins by, becoming, fast friends and getting to establish trust as fast as you can. And sometimes that takes longer. Sometimes that's really quick. And I think I think I've learned over the short time I've been doing this, or the longer than I guess I care to admit, that it's all about, it's not personal usually, the lighting designer has very little time to do their work. The director has very little time to do their work. Stage manager has very little time to do their work as well. And everyone's just trying to cram it in. And sometimes people get, pretty worked up, but it's not usually personal. And so you've just got to be able to walk away from it.
Are any you don't have to name names because we don't want to know names, especially if it's my name. But
I want to know names.
No,
I want to know names.
But any humorous-ish things that ever happen that you just sit back and say, "Oh, that's kind of funny that they're arguing about this." You know what I mean? Because you have the director and the designer, and you've got the assistants, and you sometimes have the stage manager there. There's always this mix of personalities. So anything stick out for you, Michael, that sort of made you laugh?
Oh, I don't know. It's always sometimes it's just funny to sit back and go, oh wow, it's a truly sort of ridiculous thing we're doing right now, isn't it? Asking someone to, someone's up light walking on top of some big huge set piece, and we're pointing all kinds of weird lights at it, and it's not quite moving at the right speed, and, people are getting all excited about that. It can just be every once in a while, something's really sort of hitting the, it's not quite working. It's really, it can be, a good moment to sort of lay back and go, oh yeah, it's really weird what we do, sitting in a dark room doing all these very contrived things.
That's really funny. That really is. So what advice would you give young lighting designers in their choice of training to be prepared to do what you do?
Sure. I think that it's really important to learn as much as you can technically about the tools of the work, but I think it's even more important to know how to do the work. So when you're as a designer, so I think like when you're being an associate or a coordinator or an assistant for somebody, the more shows you've done, the more you've sort of run into design challenges, you've designed shows, the more you can understand why people want to go the direction they want to go. People want to make the choices they want to make, and like what we're all and why things are being pushed in a certain direction. I think that a lot of time can be spent learning all the bits about all the pieces of software, and people can get a little hung up on that. I think it's really, really, really important to design shows and to be able to see things through that lens. It's also important to learn the technical tools, but I think knowing what even if you've never designed on a huge stage at a 2,000 seat theater, if you've been in a 100-seat theater on a show for free, and you've sort of run into the same, like, oh, I can't see their face, and kind of issues, then what's happening, and you might be helpful in solving it.
Right. Are there any projects you have coming up that you're exceptionally excited about?
I'm designing a show at the Shaw Festival this summer called the
Wonderful.
Amen Corner, the James Baldwin play, and that goes up in July or very late July.
Well, that's great. That's wonderful. Michael, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you guys for having me on.
Great to have you.
It's always good to get perspectives from younger lighting designers who are now going through the process that they may have studied. Where did you study, by the way? You went to undergraduate school, right?
Yeah, I went to an institution called the Toronto Metropolitan University. Used to be called Ryerson University, recently changed its name. And I also spent a couple of summers out at the Banff Center out in Alberta doing
Banff
operas
is
there.
Great. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's on-the-job training there. That's about as good as you can get. So, and it's interesting that when you were talking earlier about graduate programs, because when I kind of feel the same way. I think everything's changing now and has been changing for a while, that you really need to be on the job to start learning. I don't think you could be sort of isolated somewhere. And I was, a lot of us were fortunate to get in, but sometimes, those opportunities aren't there. So I think that it's really great that you did what you did, and that now you are where you are right now for that part of your career. So thank you so much for being with us. It was great.
Thank you, David. Thank you all.
Okay. Well, the rocking sounds of the Luminoids tells us that once again you've spent another morning listening to Light Talk. You can hear our show on just about every podcast site out there. Check out our website on lighttalk.org and be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast. That way you will not miss a second of Light Talk insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast. However,
if you have any Canadian lawyers and decide to litigate us, the Snook Group, with the legal team of Sparks, Burnout, and Chase, will defend us until our retirement funds are converted to Canadian dollars.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Long Beach, Gainesville, Toronto, and the Republic of Texas.
And be sure to join us next week when we talk about more lighting shenanigans and serve you much more of our casserole of nonsense.
Light Talk. We're broadcasting this questionable, but actually pretty accurate lighting knowledge and humor today from Canada.
And we'll see you all next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
Bye.